So this meeting is being recorded. So I will briefly show my slides. So thank you everyone who's able to join us today. I'm just waiting for the little thing to decide it is actually going to share the slides. There we go. To the fourth session of our series on tools for more inclusive field-based learning. I'm Jane Bunting and I get to chair today. So the outline for this session is that we'll begin with a panel discussion when three of our previous speakers, Naomi, Liz and Simon, have joined us and will give their views on some topics. And we've identified three topics that we hope to get to: encouraging the adoption of virtual tools, so how to proselytize to colleagues; how to address aspects of inclusion for students who face digital barriers rather than fieldwork barriers; and whether virtual resources need to compete with video games, etc. We hope to take about 40 minutes for that. And then I will say something about a communities of practice, and particularly a community of practice around these ideas of inclusive fieldwork and digital resources for fieldwork. And we'll then go into an open discussion of what might happen next in this space and whether there's anything useful that we can develop directly out of this sequence of talks, and wrap up with some closing remarks. So first, we're going to move to a panel discussion. I'm going to turn off my slides so that you can see the speaker's face, depending on how you have your material set up. And our first question that we put out was about encouraging the adoption of virtual components. Because whilst during COVID, everybody was scrambling to come up with virtual materials, what has often happened since is that universities have seen something of a reversion to the idea that in-person is the only option or the best option, particularly at a point when it often feels like in subjects like geography and ecology, we are actually fighting the campaign to cut costs at all possible ways, and particularly cutting down on field trips, on travel opportunities, on opportunities to get outdoors. This is both because of finances and because of being risk averse. At the same time, field trips are often seen as a really important bit of marketing. That university only takes you to Spain, we'll take you to Paraguay, we're much better. But also provides a big incentive towards exotic fieldwork. And we also find that some colleagues can just be, fieldwork is their favourite bit of the job. They love going outdoors with students. They are very outdoorsy people, perhaps. And therefore, they may not be interested in virtual techniques as they see it as a reason for students to skip out of fieldwork. I know there's often quite a lot of discussion at the moment in one of the subjects I'm involved with about how to actively punish students who choose not to go on field trips, how to make it more difficult for them to do things, unless they have an acceptable reason. So the questions of both accessibility and virtual tools can be quite controversial when talking to other colleagues. So we thought this would be a good place for our panelists to start, to ask them about their experience of working with other colleagues and of expanding the methods beyond their own modules, perhaps to others within their department. Simon, as you're first on my screen, would you like to answer first?
Yeah, I've just found the unmute button. I guess so. So I work at the University of Salford. We're geography, environment is part of a bigger school, so we also rub along with people who teach ecology, wildlife conservation, that kind of thing. So I guess my experience of virtual, so all my modules have a virtual field trip, and I find that really useful because if, for example, just the simple thing like a student's got fresh as flu, a stinking cold, we don't really want them on the bus giving it to everybody else. They can look at the virtual. It's not as good as, it's not as tendered as the real in-person experience, but they can come along the week after. They've not entirely missed out, apart from the social experience. They can join in the groups. So I kind of sell it to my colleagues that way. but I think so. Some colleagues have embraced that because they hesitate to say that they are younger and female and more likely to listen to things and have that sort of enjoy the challenge. I think some staff members see it as a lot of work. I think that's a barrier. I've got to do this, I've got to do that, I've got the other, but we have an institutional license for ThingLink. The what we call the Learning and Teaching Enhancement Centre they put on training, so it's not rocket science using it. There's plenty of people who will train you to use it, and there's lots of kit that you can borrow to do it. So the barriers are negligible, apart from in some cases attitude and previous experience and a preference for doing things in the field. I think there's there's still this doubt that it's going to replace the actual. It's going to be something that's a good excuse for the university not to pay yet another 550 quid for a coach to the Peak District, or for the conservation students to Blackpool Zoo or Chester Zoo or Monkey World, etc. So I think the pushback is tends to be from staff who maybe see it as a good way of filling 8 hours and the total counter teaching time, are possibly shy away from the investment that is required to set things up, and don't see the longer term benefits of, well, once you've set it up, then you're good to go for a number of years, plus minus tweaks, revisions. So it's kind of a longer term investment. Plus, we have a system whereby students have what are called RAPs, reasonable adjustment plans, whereby to be honest, we don't have a lot of students on our courses, the courses I teach, who have a physical issue with fieldwork, apart from fitness. But we have had students who've had, so a couple of years ago, we had somebody who wore hearing aids, and we've had to try and make some adjustments because, as Emma said to us, on a field trip, all I can hear is wind. It amplifies everything. So actually, if I can look back, then I can hear what you're actually saying rather than what I thought you were saying. Then that's useful. So there was a sort of an interest around COVID and shortly after COVID. That's now gone away, and I think there is a pushback. I think also that we don't have. I mean, our field trip is as fancy as going to Prague. Well, there's one to Denmark, one to Prague, but there's not so much an arms race for field trips, but I can see that coming in terms of cutbacks because our students don't pay for the overseas international field trips. So I think actually that's the key, because it's built into the university regs, and therefore they're automatically allowed to spend £10,000, and that's seen as a big sales thing. So I think they do use digital tools. The students on these field trips produce effectively digital online field trip diaries that we send them out with GoPros, etc. It enhances the experience, etc. But I think it's the perception that this is geography and we do field work. And that this would be that the virtual would be a replacement rather than augmenting, which I think is a message you still need empirical evidence to evidence that it is something that's added value.
Yeah, I think there's some really useful point there about this effort to communicate to colleagues about enhancement and also about limitations. Something that really interested me last week was talking about how about barriers for students with invisible disabilities, and things like becoming familiar with spaces. Althea, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I was just interested in Simon. Does that mean that your assessments are aligned with the possibility that the students will or may not go on the actual field trip? So, so it's all aligned and you don't have to adjust if someone has to use the virtual one instead of going on the
equally
actual
able one. to do both. After the field trip, there's a formative exercise, and then ultimately at the end of trimester one, there'll be sort of online exam type questions whereby they if they didn't go and they didn't get the notes, doesn't matter, because they can use what's recorded. There's actually more on the virtual field trip than there is on the day, because depending on you've got, this time we had 48 students and they don't all walk at the same pace. you've got to kind of pace it. So while you've got to kind of slow the ones at the front down and let the ones at the back keep up, but there's only a point at which there's only so much you can do. So people miss bits, and then people during the day tune out because they got a bit fed up with that, or they got distracted by something or whatever. So I think in a sense, the virtual is obviously not as good and not as much fun, but actually for the assessment and the statistics tools in ThinkLink show, I've got one that's got some really nice spikes, and nobody looks at it, and everyone looks at it before they go, and then after they go, and then before they go. There's these twin peaks for the last 5 years around certain field trips. The actual time they spend on the field trip is not very, virtual field trip is not very long, but at least they're looking at it, which always cheers me up.
Yes, it's always nice, isn't it? Should we move on? Naomi, do you have anything to add to Simon about encouraging other people to try out virtual field trips and to use them more widely?
Yeah, so I've just been making a few notes as Simon was talking, and I've decided to go back to 2012 in that my mission of starting with virtual fieldwork and working at a different institution, working with colleagues in different departments. So I was in geography and environmental science there, and I was working with colleagues in computer science because they had the skills and the knowledge. We started off looking at Oculus Rifts and virtual fieldwork then as a kind of extra for students going on fieldwork, so we could do some prep work beforehand and then some work afterwards. And I was thinking about how we kind of shared that with other colleagues through the institution, and how more people got interested was through doing this work, which was kind of in our spare time at the time, but then presenting it and sharing it through the teaching and learning conferences within the institution with a kind of little showcase. So we'd scraped together enough money for one headset. So we had that there, and people could have a go, getting students from different subjects involved, getting staff from different subjects involved. So they're kind of old school show and tell method, really, of showing people sort of, it was simple. The computer scientists did some of the work, but it was a very simple thing we'd produced. And I kind of did that in my second main institution as well. So we got small pots of internal funding, like a couple of £100 here and there, and did a lot of interdisciplinary work with people in different departments, for example, biology, and people teaching chemistry as well, environmental chemistry. And so we started thinking about how we could work together across departments and how we could show and tell to other colleagues as well. And that emphasis on there, it's not the replacing of the field work in person activities, but it's offering an alternative and additional elements as well. And I think the question that you asked, Althea, about the assessment, really interesting, and Simon spikes as well. So I do a lot of portfolio assessment, and I've used virtual field trips in modules that aren't typical fieldwork modules. So kind of modules that are mostly lecture taught, but we've popped in 3 or 4 little 2-hour field activities throughout the module. And that was nice as well, because that was working with many more colleagues who might not normally do fieldwork teaching. So looking at modules about how people access and use the natural environment and that type of thing, but based, maybe lots of these used to be based at Sheffield Hallam, lots of these were based in Sheffield city centre. So it was showing people that you don't actually have to create virtual field trips of inaccessible places. It could literally be a piece of grass or a bit of pavement outside the institution, as simple as taking a photograph and sticking it, a few photographs and maps into ThinkLink and creating activities. So showing people that for the virtual trips, we don't have to be going far afield either. It can be very local. You can do it with a mobile phone. And I think ThinkLink, I had a free license at the start for that. And really just getting people to have a go and try it out in a very low stakes method. But with all those modules, the field trips, the field activities were linked to portfolio assessments. And so that got really good engagement from students and other staff, because it was something people needed to engage with. And those spikes were very regularly showing at the portfolio assessment points. But I think they were the kind of main things that I wanted to say. Kind of the interdisciplinarity was really important, working with people in other subjects, sharing it through institutional little teaching and learning conferences, and also through societal conferences. So British Geomorphological Society, we took some stuff about virtual fieldwork and teaching to that as well. And then just trying to get people aware that having it linked to learning outcomes, module outcomes, can be these tiny little trips, these 2-hour things. Doesn't have to be a massive or singing or dancing computer game. So hopefully there was something useful in my ramblings.
Thanks. Liz?
Hi, yeah. So just kind of reflecting and building on what Naomi was saying, my journey and interest in virtual field trips really came from seeing other people do it. So in addition to my role at York, I'm also an associate lecturer for the Open University. And so obviously the Open University have this are very innovative in how they produce the materials and have been using virtual field trips in their materials. I don't know for how long, because I haven't been there forever, but they have been using virtual field trips, and seeing their approach really is kind of what inspired me and kind of interested me in this area. And I think really what I kind of got from watching their approaches is that it doesn't, I think by seeing other people do and use virtual field trips in this way, you realize that it doesn't have to be an alternative. It can be used as a supplementary tool, but also that it doesn't have to be very passive, that you can actually make virtual field trips that are very, very active and get students involved in the data collection process and so on. So I think, yeah, having lots of examples and seeing how it can be used as a supplementary tool or how it can be used as an active tool is really is kind of what inspired me to be more interested in this area. So hopefully, like Naomi was saying, that kind of showing and telling is really probably one of the best ways to get people along and using them. I think one of the challenges that we have in our department, so we've just gone sort of 3 years ago, we went through a restructure. So a lot of our teaching changed, and so we haven't had necessarily the time to start kind of creating virtual field trips in addition to all the other tweaks to the teaching and learning that we've had. And I think another challenge that we face in our department as well is sort of not stability in field trips, but the locations haven't kind of settled really. So for example, our first year field trip this year is going to a different location to last year, because I think they couldn't have secured the accommodation. So I think a challenge for getting colleagues to buy in at the moment is, if you're going to invest a lot of time in creating virtual field trips, you need to be confident that you're not going to create a virtual field trip and then not be at that location again because you haven't been able to secure accommodation. So I feel like that's a challenge that we are facing, kind of in maybe having like the setup that Simon's got, where you have a virtual alternative to your field trips. So this is kind of my thinking behind where we are. I think one thing that I'm really hoping to do here is create more virtual field trips to kind of hopefully enhance our learning. Again, it's not as a replacement to the real trips, but things like having a field video bank, so that students, when they come to do their dissertations, have a bank of video methodologies of what we can do in the field or what we can do in the lab, to help inspire them to do field and lab-based methodologies, and remind them of the range of different methodologies that they've come across. So I'm really hoping that that's something that we can do, and that maybe staff will have buy-in, because if you've got this video bank, it helps maximize the time that they have in the field, but also it means that they can say, well, if you want to do this methodology, go onto this resource, and you've got an example there. So that's kind of one way that I'm hoping to kind of expand what we do at York, and hopefully get more buy-in from staff that way.
Thank you, Liz. We've just had a question in the chat about whether anyone could suggest some examples of VFTs of different levels of complexity that we could maybe share with people, that could share with other people, that are viewable. And I think that's maybe something we can add to the chat and compile as we go through, because we have mentioned various examples. Another comment that time is really, really difficult to get in the extra time for creating a VFT. And we had some good examples shared in the Padlet in week 1, which I think Althea may know where that is. So we can compile some examples. Oh, thanks, Althea's looking for it. That's great. I think there's some really useful points about the pluses and minuses and the issue of the longevity of virtual field trips. And sometimes there's quite a lot of incentive, certainly in my context, to keep it simple, because I have no idea if I'll be on that module, even if that field trip destination exists. Simon.
Just a thought on what Liz was saying about, okay, you go to place A and you don't want to make a virtual field trip because you might be going to place B the next time. Actually, that might be a positive, in that you're not going to the same damn place year after year after year, because we've all planned a field trip, and the first year it's really stressful because you've never been before. The second time you kind of get the hang of it, and by the third, fourth, 10th, whatever time, you're fed up. So in terms of environmental impact, if you could flip those sites around and rest one year. But what I'm trying to say is also, for one of my field trips, we go to this big landslide in the Peak District, Mamtor. But actually, then there's a virtual field trip to support that. But there's another virtual field trip to an adjacent landslide in the next valley that I'm using for assessment. So that second site is what I use for what I'm going to use. I'm going to try it for the first time. It might go horribly wrong, but I'm just thinking, if you did go and make a virtual field trip and then went to a second site, you could use the virtual site as an assessment point for the second one, in terms of the things they learned, blah, blah, blah. So it's not necessarily a loss. It may be something that you can use in a different way, provided that you've got a time to fix that. The other thing is that pooling of resources. We were talking about like this with some colleagues yesterday, in terms of around the university, everyone's making a virtual tour. Everyone's putting 360 photos, and there's a huge data set, so nobody's quite sure which door this shows, what door that shows. And but the guy who's organising that is going to set up a sort of a standard form. Otherwise, the same back door to Peel building is going to be named 47 times. It's actually, if you're sharing those resources, it's worth thinking about the naming protocols, so you can then archive it and find it. And we were going to add in, this is just around camp, what 3 words? So you would then know not only this is Peel building front, but it's also this is where it is. So, but again, that I think resources are building up, and actually then that's a saving, because our marketing team pays some external company a shed load of money, whereas actually we can do it in-house for using, in our case, ThingLink, because we already pay for the license. So there are actually ways in which you can save money, get more people using it, and so that's quite a nice incentive going forward. So that's, okay.
I know Naomi's comment that there can be an issue with getting budget holders on board. Something we've actually had some success with is giving it to students as a professional practice project. So a student who maybe isn't able to find an external placement or doesn't have transport or whatever, actually giving them a project to develop some of these materials as well. So I think there are a lot of ways once you start to be creative. And I'm aware of the time. So the second topic that we thought would be interesting to discuss is, our original goal is that these are tools to increase inclusion. But there are students for whom having digital resources at all actually is a barrier. And that can be students who have trouble reading materials. I think Simon talked last week about having translation tools with materials. So there are some translation tools and some text readers. But there are students who have issues with dyslexia, students who have visual issues, and students who potentially have just cost and access issues with having the technology to access a virtual tool, or a virtual tool only working well on one kind of platform, or, as we found during COVID, issues with Wi-Fi. One of our rural students had to go to the end of the road and sit at the bottom of the telegraph pole in order to get signal to attend class every day. And others were going into the attic and sticking a dongle out of the window and so on. So I wondered if you had any comments on those aspects of inclusion, on the sort of the using the computer itself aspects. And we'll go the other way around this time. Maybe start with Liz.
Yes. So I guess my first tip would be to speak to, if you've got a digital inclusion team, or anybody who works in accessibility, inclusivity at the university, because they really have the specialist knowledge of what software, will work with things like screen readers. They'll be able to offer you advice on how to make the virtual field trip inclusive and accessible. So yeah, I've spoken to our digital inclusion team very briefly about kind of virtual field trips and got some advice about what software they would recommend. And they were really knowledgeable and really active in knowing how I could go about making an inclusive field trip. And I guess kind of linked to that, I think keeping things simple is a really it's sort of an easy way to make sure that your field trip is inclusive and accessible. I think if it's too kind of whizzy and lots of things to click around and navigate and things like that, I think that's when it starts to become overwhelming and very difficult for students to engage. So I also kind of think to help make things inclusive and accessible is trying to also keep things simple, have really simple and clear messages about what your field trip is aiming to do and achieve, what key messages, sort of what key teaching and learning points you want your students to engage with. I think those also help. And then in addition to things that I think we've already discussed across the different sessions, is just thinking about having video captions, making sure you have those, thinking about color, text contrasts, thinking about how clicky it is. I find clicky things quite challenging. So I think some of the tools that we use to make documents accessible and our PowerPoints accessible is to make sure we use those in our virtual field trips as well.
Thanks very much, Liz. Simon?
Yeah, I think this is right in terms of keep it simple, keep it clear. And the way in which I've always done that is create something and then send it to some mystery shoppers, get some colleagues, get some students, get some people just to play with it, just to have a look, give you a bit of feedback in terms of, you know, that link doesn't work, that I ended up down the rabbit hole, I got lost, what the hell were you talking about on that slide, etc. It's get it tested before you share it. The other thing is that our students tend to, they kind of exposed to it in week 6 first year, and then they see another one in the second term, and it kind of builds up. So yeah, by the second year, level 5, they then do some co-creation, and I think that in the co-creation, I don't think there's always, in a class of 30, 40, our usual class sizes, there's always one or two who've struggled with the tech, but then they've struggled with everything. So, you know, if you know that they're going to have problems and they need some support, that's fine. But actually, when we found students I found students engaging with them and creating them, actually, they've added a lot of value, and some of the stuff that they've done, some of the techniques that they've used, some of the approaches they've taken is really good. And it's actually quite, you have to sort of say, oh, how did you do that? It's sort of quite, I learned from them. So I think I get you don't want too many things going off all at once, etc. But actually, a lot of these guys are what's the phrase? Digital natives. I don't know, is that gone out of fashion? But they're very used to this stuff. But I tend to try and structure it so they could just go from site 1, 2 to 3 and look at the view. But then there's extra things that questions, things that they can, so it builds up. You could look at the basic and you've just seen the site and you realize it's not a muddy footpath, the terrain's okay, through to lots of links to other stuff. And then sometimes I'll just hide things to silly clips, to music videos, or Les Dawson playing the piano or whatever, just to encourage them to spin around and find things and make it fun. One of the things early on, and I hate, is the students ask for a little audio clip. So, okay, this is site 1, welcome to site 1, blah, 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 which it's the sound of your own voice, isn't it? I don't like, who's that Yorkshireman? So you can, I think, adding in the audio, which you can turn off if you don't like, if that's not your thing, but having nice clear text, having different, you know, so you can see it just basic, just look at the pretty pictures, or you can then, you know, drill down, get some extra detail, so it's worth you clicking through. But then what's really, really annoying is if you then have to click back 47 times to get back to where you thought before you started all the clicking, and like you're on site 2 and then you got distracted and clicked on things, and then you've lost them. Plus, it's also very annoying if you go back and it takes you right back to the very beginning, and then you've got to click all the way through. So thinking about the structure and how it's put together so it works, which is where your mystery shopper comes in. So you know, it's like, I don't know, get it to appeal at a number of levels for those who are just browsing and want one level of information through to people who really want the detail and have to perceive that, well, you've got me to click on all these different things, and then there's a picture of a cat. What's the point? You know, they need to know. So make sure that everything you've got there makes sense. There's a reason. If there's no reason, then delete it, you know, and simplify it. But they don't have to be very very complicated, and you can make, you know, just for particular very specific tasks, just to show people how to get to a certain site or a particular technique. There could just be 3 images and a little video clip, bit of text, link to something else, done. They don't necessarily have to be complicated.
Naomi, have you got anything you'd like to add to that about accessibility?
Yeah, so I wrote a couple of notes down so I don't forget them, because I'm in the mood of forgetting things at the moment. So thinking about the access and IT issues, Wi-Fi issues, which I've had students in the past with challenges. I'd often book IT rooms for this to take place, and then you get more of the cohort as well. So some of the alternative activities were for students who couldn't attend something. Book a room on campus so that they can be in a room. You might be there as well. So they're gaining more of that experience, but it removes some of that kind of digital barrier if they don't have the Wi-Fi at home or the laptop or computer that they need to do that, or the headphones or whatever, or they don't have the space at home to do it as well, which can be a problem. I think one of the other things as well was providing some kind of field guide that wasn't necessarily online, or if you're expecting people to be able to work online, then you're expecting them to have access to 2 screens or to be clicking between screens. So with students on a field trip, you'll obviously quite frequently produce a handout or a guide or something like that they might have with them that isn't digital. So it's a combination between the digital and the old school. So I found it really helpful in the past to create a field guide that's for the digital field trip, but that isn't, it's available digitally, but it's also available in hard copy so that you can use that. My digital field trips are all quite simple, but then the learning instructions, the links to the assessment, the module outcome, also kind of comes through within these other instructions, this field guide that they can work through, and encouraging them to take notes in the way that they might normally do. So for some, that might be a field notebook. For others, they might be recording their notes on their phone, or verbally recording, orally recording things as well. So kind of trying to overcome some of the digital barriers through the actual providing computer access, but also providing guidance that doesn't rely on huge digital skills, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I've found that actually providing almost a tick list of things to do can help a lot with what Simon was talking about getting lost, and especially for students who maybe struggle a bit with executive function and get a bit prone to just click all the buttons to see the shiny things.
And I think especially when field trips are more simple, then that can guide them very nicely through it. And yes, we might talk a bit later on about shiny versus simple field trips. But I think that's really important, having that kind of structured guidance for all students.
Yeah. I think our final question, if we can keep it fairly brief, was to ask about how the extent to which virtual resources might need to compete with video games and AI generated art and so on. Because I think this is something that I know colleagues often get very stuck on, is the fact that pictures have to be high quality. And one colleague told me, well, I can't do it because Rob's pictures are so much better than mine because he gets to go on safari in Africa. So there's no point doing a field guide to, doing a bad field guide to the Humber Estuary. And this assumption that it has to be really high tech to capture students' attention. I think Simon, when we were circulating the ideas for these questions, Simon put it as pedagogy versus shininess, which I think is a nice way of thinking about it. But have you ever had any particular issues with complaints about quality or concerns from colleagues about stuff having to be very high visual quality, or particular challenges in that area? And I think it's Naomi's turn to go first.
So I haven't ever had complaints from students. So I would say, and I think some people in this room might have heard me say this before, but I've worked with colleagues who have produced very shiny sort of video film quality style virtual field trips, but the student learning side of things has been less clear. So for me, for giving it to students, it was hard to know what it was they should be doing with that material. It was hard for me as a colleague to see what learning was going on, what the students were going to be doing, apart from exploring these sort of more high quality video based 3D 360 imagery than maybe some of my simple thing link related maps with points to click on and stuff to do. So for me, I think if the students know the purpose of the activity, they're not being sold it as watching a film or going into this particular high quality visual environment. It's sold as a learning activity. I think if it's done in the right way, with the right instructions, the right enthusiasm, with expectations managed, they know what they have to do, how it relates to the module or the degree or the assessment, then I think as long as the photos are high enough quality that what you're asking them to do can be done through that imagery or the drawings or the maps or whatever you're providing them with, the activities are good enough quality, then I think that the links to the module, the links to the learning, students have got so many different pressures on at the moment that knowing that there's a purpose and that they'll gain something mainly related to assessments through what they're doing, I think for me is the key thing. And as long as the tool enables the learning, then I think that's the important thing. So I feel very strongly that the learning should drive what it is we produce.
Yeah, thanks. Liz?
I think Naomi's covered everything that I was going to say. So yeah, I just think students are time poor. They've got lots of, like Naomi says, they've got lots of pressures. Often they're having to do paid work as well as study, and I think they just want to know that they're going to learn something. There is a purpose to doing this virtual field trip, and I think as long as that is clear, it definitely doesn't need to be all singing and all dancing. And again, I think I can't find the papers, but I think there are papers to suggest that simpler virtual field trips are to some extent better at delivering the learning outcomes than these really shiny ones, as we're calling them. So I mean, a lot of that, I think a lot of those studies were during the pandemic, so it'd be quite interesting to see whether that's still the perception now. But I do think, yeah, the key thing is making sure that the virtual field trip meets some learning goal and communicating that really clearly to the students. And then I'm not so sure since the pandemic whether there is this need to make them higher quality than they perhaps were during the pandemic. I'm not sure. It might be quite interesting to find that out. But my feeling is it's more to do with the learning gains rather than the actual kind of look and feel of everything.
Thank you. Simon, have any final comment on that?
Yeah, I think in terms of the learning outcomes, I think absolutely. I think nothing gets students more annoyed or disengaged than why are we doing this? What are we doing? What's this for? So that needs to be clearly expressed, and they need to get it, and that might be tends to be within the virtual field trip, within the literature they get to it, and what you tell them, in the session before, and what you sort of cover again. I think so. My experience of people feeding back on the quality of these things was initially at back into the pandemic. I think that it was just something that was new and different, and students were just really grateful it wasn't another damn YouTube. It was fun, it was different, and then they started to get a bit picky about the quality of the images, etc. But I think actually it doesn't have to be super high tech. You can actually do, having seen what they produced, co-creating just with a phone. I think many people's smartphone is a hell of a lot better than mine, and it can produce some really good stuff, and they're happy to use it. They know how to use it, they know how to download it, upload it, change the filters, blah 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 blah. But I think so I think it has to be an acceptable level, beyond somewhere between basic and shiny. But actually, sometimes I think having a bit of shininess in there does have its benefits. If you can, you're trying to, so my experience was we were in a very Lathgildale, which is in the Peak District National Park in the White Peak, and it's a really narrow dale, and we're working our way along, and we took a drone along. And actually, the fact that you could then put the drone up and above you, and you could see actually the rest of this is a plateau, and this is really inside. They kind of got that different perspective. It was the only way to explain, short of schlepping all the way up to the top and then all the way back down again, which wouldn't have been good. So different perspectives, and that aerial perspective and a 3D view and things like that. I think that kind of shininess can be really useful, a different angle, a different perspective. And also some of the 3D models I've made, if I'm trying to point at the bit of cross bedding and I can't quite explain it, and I was that boy at school who was never engaged in cricket or football, anything to do with eye-hand skills. So if I try and throw a pebble at the relevant bit, I know you shouldn't do that in outcrops. It was a pebble that was already there, but I can't hit anything with top. But if they can pull that up on their phone and it's already annotated and align that with what they're looking at, they go, oh, okay, I've got it. And actually the fact that it's a natty way of doing it for some of them will help them to engage in that. So I think I think it needs to be suitable quality. They need to know why they're doing it, and there be an outcome rather than click, 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 click. What am I looking at? It's a picture of a cat. But actually, sometimes just jazzing it up and adding a bit of shininess, a different view, a different perspective, with a reason for that, can be something that just grabs the ones that you're losing, the ones that have seen it all before, the ones who are disengaging. So I think it needs to be fit for purpose. But it needs to be, and on the one hand, but also it doesn't need to be something that's super complicated. They're going to take you 11 weeks to make, and then you're going to use it for half an hour. It doesn't have to be. It's about a balance for both the students and for the creator as well, I think.
Thanks, Simon. I'm sure we could go on chatting for the rest of our time, but we do want to try and move on to thinking about, having met a variety of really interesting things in the last few weeks, to talk about how we might extend that beyond just these sessions. And hopefully it has now agreed to share my screen. Yes. So we wanted to think about the idea of developing a community of practice, or extending a community of practice. Communities of practice, if we put it formally, can be sort of systems of collective critical inquiry and reflection, or more casually, groups of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do and want to learn how to do it better through interacting, essentially to support each other. And this workshop series itself really has its origins in a community of practice. The Virtual Paleosciences, or VIPS project, was a COVID response, which began with what the heck are we going to do, and seeking to compile existing resources and share strategies for teaching field and lab rich subjects in a pivot to online. And that led to some children of VIPS, shall we say, child projects, such as Cultivate, which was mentioned, Linda York's project, DigiLego, which is a resource of a variety of online materials, which includes a variety of resources for virtual field trip around Berlin and in Killarney in Ireland. The more inclusive fieldwork project, these various online resources. And that, as I say, has partly brought us on to putting on this series of activities. And we've all found a lot of benefit from working in community. So wanted to take some time to think about what might be useful next, what might follow. We've thought of a few possibilities, or categories of possibilities. There are community building activities, so simply ways to keep in touch and to communicate and talk about what's going on. And whether that's a virtual coffee catch up equivalent of a coffee or a drop-in call every few months, whether that's a mailing list that lets people swap links to materials and questions with the community, whether that's through one-off events like something at a British Ecological Society meeting, this being a BS series, or a seminar series where people speak about their projects, whether that's a concrete product, there are plenty of papers out there that say this is a good thing, but thinking about maybe open educational resources, things like creating a virtual field trip using Google Earth story maps, something around the design and the storyboarding approaches that we've talked about, examples of assessment, so building up some digital resources that people could draw on. Perhaps even a research project, as people mentioned in the last couple of points. There's a lot of evidence claimed, but the vast majority of research papers tend to involve very small numbers of students, typically only in one institutional context. And building up a better body of evidence for the use of virtual material for improving inclusion and student experience across multiple institutions, therefore students with different contexts, different sets of experience, and potentially, say, working towards a bid for research funding or developing a project that isn't funded but is a smaller scale project across multiple institutions. So these were all ideas that we had come up with as something that would be worth doing. And what we'd like to do is use most of the rest of the time to actually discuss some of those points and to make sure everybody's got their words. I've also has a chance to share ideas. Or comments. I've also created a Padlet. So there is a QR code on this screen, which I'm about to turn off, and I'll put the Padlet link into the chat once I can actually see the chat again.